4 serving British soldiers under arrest accused of belonging to a neo-Nazi group. The far-right National Action was banned last year after celebrating the murder of MP Joe Cox. In all, 5 people are being questioned under the Terrorism Act. Also on News at 10 tonight. The strongest Atlantic hurricane on record, Superstorm Irma, bears down on the Caribbean.
I getting some stuff for the hurricane because the hurricane is coming direct on us.
Haunting images from Bangladesh, where more than 100,000 Muslim refugees from neighbouring Myanmar are fleeing terrifying violence. And happy 40th birthday to the spaceship that has voyaged further from Earth than anything else made by man.
This is ITV News at 10 with Raghi Omar.
Good evening. In the battle against terrorism, we would reasonably expect members of Britain's armed forces to be on the side of law and order. But today came the shocking revelation that 4 serving soldiers, are under arrest tonight under the Terrorism Act, suspected of being part of a neo-Nazi group committed to violence. The group is called National Action, the only far-right group to be banned in Britain. And that ban was brought in after the group supported the murder of the Labour MP Joe Cox. One of the soldiers was arrested in Cyprus, the other 3 in Britain. A 5th man, a civilian, was also arrested.
A demonstration by National Action in Newcastle. But months later, the Home Secretary banned this group. It became not only an extremist organisation, but a terrorist one too.
The battle has come to us. It rages in our towns, our cities.
It used glossy propaganda just like IS or Al-Qaeda. But just like those organisations, membership is banned.
As a despised and persecuted minority.
One of the suspects is being transferred from RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus after being arrested at an army base nearby. The Ministry of Defence said 3 more soldiers were also arrested in the UK. We can confirm that a number of serving members of the army have been arrested under the Terrorism Act for being associated with a prescribed far-right group. These arrests are the consequence of a Home Office police force-led operation supported by the army. Today, ITV News was shown evidence of a separate allegation made to police 9 months ago, claiming an army member was an NA sympathiser. This email was sent to the police in January, a complaint in confidence. It said a known member of NA has joined the army and started basic training. He makes out on his Facebook he wants to join the Rifles with British Army, would prove embarrassing. National Action was outlawed after endorsing the murder of the MP Joe Cox. But months later, an ITV News investigation revealed that former members were still meeting and still celebrating the killing. But today's arrests make this the largest police investigation into Britain's first far-right terror group.
And Rohit is here in the studio with me. Rohit, to be clear, the police aren't saying that this was in a clear response to an imminent attack or terrorist action by this group.
That appears to be the case. From what we've gathered on the ground, there were no bomb disposal squads. There were no heavily armed police units which were sent in for these arrests. The allegation seems to be not that they were planning a terrorist atrocity or hoarding weapons or hoarding explosives. But in the eyes of the law, that doesn't necessarily matter. Simply being a member of this group is a terrorist offence. This is not a hate group. This is a terror group, and there is no form of membership or associate membership that is anything less than a terrorist offence.
And you've been following the makeup, the composition, and the wherewithal of National Action. What makes them tick? I mean, what makes them work?
Well, let's be clear, these allegations are still being investigated. No charges have been brought, but the development of this organisation in the last 9 months since they were banned has followed a familiar model. There are many members from this group who may not use the name but haven't given up the ideology. I think what we can call this is the Al-Muhajiroon model, similar to Anjem Choudhury's group, which was banned in 2010, but in 2017 could have been linked to the London Bridge attack. And so this is a sort of a challenge to the robustness of the law in terms of prescribing terrorist groups.
OK, Rohit, thanks very much indeed. Now, barely a week after the arrival in the United States of Hurricane Harvey, another even more powerful storm is on its way. First, though, it is bearing down on a string of Caribbean islands like a line of skittles in the path of a huge bowling ball. Antigua and Barbuda are bracing themselves for Hurricane Irma and winds of 180 miles an hour. It's now a Category 5 storm and the most powerful to be recorded in the Atlantic basin.
A satellite image shows Irma building in speed and strength as she approaches land. From the cockpit of Hurricane Hunter aircraft, this is the view for pilots from America's National Oceanic Center as they fly into the storm to try and measure just how destructive she might be. They've upgraded this to a Category 5 hurricane, due to hit the Leeward Islands tonight, moving on to Puerto Rico and reaching Florida by the weekend. On the island of St. Kitts, they're battening down. The government has issued repeated warnings as the worst storm for 12 years heads to their shores.
Everyone is nervous and just trying to prepare as best as we can. Irma is predicted to have winds up to 180 miles per hour, and that can turn ordinary objects into deadly missiles. So we're just trying to be as prepared as we can.
As the storm gets closer, one British family has been unable to get off the Turks and Caicos.
They're boarding the hill places. You can see behind us, everything's being boarded up. There's no one about. Everywhere's sort of quite dead at the minute. Everyone's in the hotel rooms, hoping, I think, to try and escape the island.
In Florida, the panic has already set in. Even though Irma isn't predicted to reach them for another 3 days, they're running out of water.
Whatever you ask for for water, they only give you 2 per person. And the lines are crazy, cashiers, it's packed.
The governor has declared a state of emergency and is telling people to stock up.
It's very important that everybody in our state gets prepared. 3 days of water per person, 3 days of food per person. Make sure you have all the medicine you need.
Long queues have formed at petrol stations after one county issued an emergency evacuation order, telling all visitors they must leave by tomorrow morning. Juliet Bremner, News at 10.
Parliament returned to work today and it was straight back down to the business of Brexit, with Labour promising to throw a serious spanner into the proceedings. Labour has told its MPs to vote against the European Union withdrawal bill next Monday, not because it doesn't want to uphold the result of the referendum. Rather, it's worried that in its current form, the bill would let the government grab powers from Parliament over things like workers' rights and consumer protection.
Westminster was back in action today. Many MPs returning from summer holidays, the Brexit Secretary returning from a trip to Brussels, which few here believe went especially well.
And while at times these negotiations have been tough, it's clear that we've made concrete progress on many important issues.
He admitted that on the issue of a final bill, the UK and the EU were far apart.
It's clear that the two sides have very different legal stances. Generally, we should not underestimate the usefulness of the process so far, but it's also clear that there are significant differences to be bridged in this sector.
And today, at this meeting of the Shadow Cabinet, another problem for the government. Labour agreed they would oppose the EU withdrawal bill, which comes to Parliament on Thursday, unless it is radically altered.
This bill is a constitutional nightmare. We don't oppose the transfer of those powers into UK law. What we oppose is the way in which this government is going about it.
The problem is the so-called Henry VIII clauses, which allow ministers to change laws without coming back to ask Parliament. The government says they need that to make all that EU law, which is coming into UK law, work in its new context. But opponents here in Parliament say the government is asking for sweeping powers. There are also Conservatives who are worried about this.
While it's true that the government does take such powers with ordinary legislation, the scope of that legislation is usually very limited. In this case, the scope of the legislation is almost unlimited, and that's the problem.
But the Remainers outside Parliament can't count on Tory rebels to upset Brexit just yet. Most say they'll try to amend the bill later. Even so, the government faces a tight vote on a big bill just days into the new term. Carlton and News at 10, Westminster.
And our political editor, Robert Pessin, is here in the studio with me. Robert, does Labour's opposition to the withdrawal bill signal a shift in its position over the summer, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, during the general election, the official positions of both parties on Brexit, both big parties, very similar. But the penny dropped for Labour that one of the reasons it did so well in the general election is lots of those who voted to remain in the EU decided that Labour might possibly be moving in a more pro-European direction. And, you know, I suppose under pressure, they are now. So, as you say, they are going to vote against this bill, a really important bill, which is essential to getting us out of the EU. But also, very importantly, the Labour Party is now in a position where it is committed to staying in the European single market and the customs union during a transition period after the formal exit period. And again, that is very different from the government's position.
So they're quite material shifts.
Yes, I mean, and my own view is, for what it's worth, that Labour will, over the course of the next year, shift in an even more pro-EU position and might end up, indeed, not inconceivable, you know, eventually saying that it wants to stay in the EU. But they're a long way from that at the moment.
And news tonight of a Brexit-related leak.
Yes, that's right. So The Guardian has got hold of a draft white paper on immigration. No huge surprises in this leak of proposed government policy. And I think both Brexiteers and those who are keener on the EU will see things they both like and dislike. The Brexiteers will take heart from the fact that it will definitely, if this becomes official policy, become much harder for non-skilled European workers to come to the UK and then bring family members over. So in that sense, much tougher on immigration. But the paper does open up the possibility of there being more favourable treatment for EU workers compared to workers from outside the EU. You'll probably remember during that very heated referendum campaign, lots of the Brexiteers said they wanted parity between Europeans and non-Europeans.
Okay, Robert, thanks. Nice to have you back again. Thank you. Once again, it seems President Trump has demonstrated his capacity to divide opinion in the United States over immigration. His target this time, nearly 800,000 people known as Dreamers, who were brought into the country illegally as children. Under President Obama, they were allowed to live, study or work thanks to what is called the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, with the Obama administration arguing that they shouldn't be punished for their parents' actions. But today, the program was scrapped.
Outside the White House, immigrants and advocates for America's undocumented workers pleaded for compassion, hoping that the president would not follow through on a key campaign promise.
This is what community looks like.
But America's hardline Attorney General dashed that hope, making clear that hundreds of thousands of immigrant children given temporary legal protection could now face deportation.
As Attorney General, it is my duty to ensure that the laws of the United States are enforced and that the constitutional order is upheld.
The decision to scrap the Obama-era program was portrayed as a victory for American workers.
It also denied jobs to hundreds of thousands of Americans by allowing those same illegal aliens to take those jobs.
Even by the standards of this White House, the decision is incredibly divisive.
thrilling to his core supporters, but shocking and appalling to his critics, not least to the 800,000 young immigrants whose status is now in grave doubt. I mean, how are you feeling right now?
My heart is broken. My heart is broken. I don't know what's going to happen with my future.
You're very disappointed.
Yes, yes.
Angry?
Very angry.
And for this Vietnam veteran and activist, it's a national disgrace.
All it means is I'm a bit ashamed of my country and embarrassed for it, but it also makes me ever more resolute.
When he left the White House in January, Barack Obama said he would still speak out, if necessary, on behalf of young and vulnerable immigrants. And so he has today, condemning his successor, with a Facebook statement that reads in part, "To target these young people is wrong. It is self-defeating, and it is cruel."
Well, I have a great heart for the folks we're talking about, a great love for them.
But Donald Trump has claimed tonight he has admiration for the young immigrants, the so-called dreamers, who came to America as children without documents. Yet his decision today puts many of them in immediate legal jeopardy. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
America's tough talk towards North Korea was undermined at a stroke by Russia's President Putin. He said whipping up military hysteria made absolutely no sense and tougher sanctions would not work either. North Koreans would rather eat grass, he said, than give up their nuclear program. His conclusion, like China's, is that talking remains the best option, leaving President Trump rather isolated.
Today, the South Korean Navy practiced its combat strategy. 3 warships conducted a live firing drill aimed at retaliating against a North Korean attack. Attending an economic summit in China, Vladimir Putin warned such military exercises were whipping up war hysteria.
The use of sanctions of any kind in this case is useless and inefficient. The escalation of military hysteria is completely meaningless. This is a road to nowhere and could lead to a global catastrophe.
The US ambassador to the United Nations then admitted sanctions are not working, but said she will still push for more at a Security Council vote next week.
Do we think more sanctions are going to work on North Korea? Not necessarily, but what does it do? It cuts off the revenue that allows them to build ballistic missiles.
South Korea has pledged to explore all military options following North Korea's 6th nuclear test, and President Trump has confirmed he will provide the hardware necessary. Seoul would likely be devastated in the event of military conflict, and that's why the government here is now considering bringing US tactical nuclear weapons back to the peninsula. The hydrogen bomb, said to have been inspected by Kim Jong-un at the weekend, has been described by one of his UN diplomats as a gift addressed to the United States.
The US will receive more gift packages from my country as long as it relies on reckless provocations and futile attempts to put pressure on the DPRK.
North Korea has been detected transporting what was thought to be a long-range ballistic weapon. It is no longer a question of if it will launch another missile. It now appears to be a case of when. Debbie Edward, News at 10, Seoul.
Staying in Asia, where a religious exodus of historic proportions is taking place in Myanmar, what used to be known as Burma. After weeks of violence there, tens of thousands of ethnic Muslims have fled in fear over the border to Bangladesh. The Rohingya people have long been persecuted in Myanmar, which is mostly Buddhist. Since the 1970s, nearly 1 million have been forced out, but more than 1 million stayed, living in the Rakhine area of the country where they settled centuries ago. They are denied citizenship, rendering them stateless. The recent surge in violence began just under a fortnight ago when police checkpoints and an army base were attacked. Around 123,000 people are understood to have fled the brutal backlash, streaming into Bangladesh. Many have died on the journey. The United Nations says 36,000 have crossed the border today alone.
This is the face of ethnic cleansing in Southeast Asia. Rohingya Muslims, half-starved and terrified, are pouring across the border from Myanmar, formerly Burma, to Bangladesh. And not everyone makes it alive. The waterways clogged with the bodies of those who were too weak for this journey. The fact they're fleeing to Bangladesh, one of the most impoverished countries in the world, shows you how desperate they are. And this is why they're leaving. Nationalist militias, some say backed by the Burmese army, have torched dozens of villages. This man says the military destroyed everything. After killing some Rohingya, the military burned their houses and shops. Ultra-nationalist Buddhist mobs have surrounded many Muslim Rohingya villages, ethnic tensions stoked, critics say, by the Burmese government itself. And that's what makes this crisis so perplexing, because of the pro-democracy leader simply known as the Lady. Aung San Suu Kyi effectively runs the country after her party won a landslide in the first free vote in a generation 2 years ago. But despite winning the Nobel Peace Prize for years of peaceful resistance against the military junta, she has failed to condemn the violence against Muslims in Burma.
The moral issue here is, as a government, as a Nobel laureate, we are expecting her to say something, at least for the Rohingya community, as a human being, not more than this.
So many are now dying at sea. One aid agency is rerouting a ship that had been rescuing refugees in the Mediterranean to the Bay of Bengal. But this is a people left with no choice. As the arson attacks and massacres gather pace, bloodshed some are now labelling a genocide. Dan Rivers, News at 10.
In the chronicle of failures by certain social service departments to prevent the deaths of children supposedly in their care, there was a new and worrying explanation. A report into the death of 21-month-old Aisha Jane Smith said care professionals had focused too much on the needs of Aisha's mother, her killer, because of the threat to her of domestic abuse. Catherine Smith is already behind bars for murdering Aisha, stamping on her so hard she actually broke her heart.
Aisha Jane Smith was identified as being at risk from the day she was born, but in the weeks before she died, professionals missed vital warning signs. She was killed in her own home by her own mother, Catherine Smith, who is serving a life sentence for murder. But a review published today found social workers had allowed the needs of the mother to overshadow those of her daughter.
The main point for me in this case is that the focus of attention was on the mother and her vulnerability to domestic abuse, and not Aisha Jane.
Her mother was in a volatile relationship with Matthew Rigby, but as it grew more violent, today's report found there was a failure to re-evaluate how Aisha was being cared for. Social workers displayed a lack of professional curiosity and didn't challenge the mother enough. They were inclined to take what she said at face value. It meant the growing risks to Aisha were not fully recognised. But there were warnings. These photographs showing her with a scratched face were given to social workers by her natural father. The report is also critical that he wasn't consulted enough. The director of Derbyshire Children's Services has now apologised to him. The report says her death couldn't have been predicted. Do you accept it could have been prevented?
The report is clear that the death couldn't have been predicted, even having pulled all of the information together in the way that a serious case review does.
There were clear warning signs.
There were opportunities for practice to have been stronger, and there were opportunities with Aisha Jane that weren't taken in the way that we would want them to.
The local hospital trust has also apologised for missing 2 chances to spot signs of abuse. It and the council say they've already learned lessons from Aisha's death, although the report found no endemic failings. Indeed, a meeting to discuss her safety was finally held the day before she was killed. Ben Chapman, News at 10, Burton-upon-Trent.
With the issue of Scottish independence on the back burner, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon was on a mission today to show there was plenty more to her SNP government than just that single issue. She confirmed plans to scrap the 1% cap on public sector pay without saying what it would go up to. She also promised a radical change to how schools in Scotland are run in an education system that not so long ago was the envy of the world.
Education is what Nicola Sturgeon asked to be judged on, but her report card reads must do better. That's why she has once again made education reform the defining mission of her government.
A new education bill will deliver the biggest and the most radical change to how our schools are run that we have seen in the lifetime of devolution. It will give head teachers significant new powers, influence and responsibilities.
After 10 years on the SNP's watch, Scottish schools this year recorded their worst ever performance in international league tables. Having teachers for the right subjects might seem a basic requirement, but that's the challenge head teachers here still face.
It clearly does have an impact when you don't have a full quota of teachers in front of young people all day, every day.
Scotland will also lift the 1% pay cap for public sector workers from next year, but Nicola Sturgeon didn't say by how much, and that detail really matters for those who've suffered a real terms pay cut.
Our pay rises have been so minimal, they've not even kept up with inflation. And that spells trouble for hard-working employees and hard-working families.
So you're certainly looking for more than 1.5 or 2%?
No doubt in my mind.
Notably, there wasn't a single mention of independence today. The newly buoyant Scottish Tories will take credit for pressing mute on that, and for some of the other ideas.
Indeed, given how much the SNP has poached from the Scottish Conservative manifestos over recent months, I'm tempted to suggest that our programme for government should be called Something Borrowed, Something Blue.
Accused of neglecting the day job, today was Nicola Sturgeon's fight back. As she wished, she is being judged on education and whether there's more to the SNP than independence. Peter Smith, News at 10, Glasgow.
Wales have beaten Moldova to keep alive the dream of reaching the next summer's World Cup finals. Wales in yellow needed to win their remaining game to at least make the playoffs. The deadlock was broken in the 80th minute. Hal Robson-Kanu opening the scoring. Aaron Ramsey made it 2-0 with the help of a deflection in injury time. And that lifts Wales into second place in their group. Highlights are on ITV4 later. Now, finally, a space project that was only supposed to last 5 years is today celebrating its 40th birthday, and some amazing discoveries along the way. Since Voyager 1 was launched, it has travelled 13 billion miles. It's by far the most distant man-made object in space, and it's still going strong at 30,000 miles an hour. On board, a collection of musical greetings in case there really is anyone out there, including Chuck Berry, Beethoven's Fifth, and African pygmy songs.
It is as far as humankind has reached. The Voyager's journey to the edge of our solar system has shown us things we have never seen. Planets and moons that could only be glimpsed from Earth were suddenly seen and photographed by a spacecraft passing close by.
Jupiter is its own little planetary system, and the same for Saturn. And we didn't realise that until we got the fantastic images back from Voyager. We had no idea about the active volcanoes on Io, of the ocean beneath Europa, and just it really opened our eyes to the diversity of bodies in the solar system.
The Voyager mission isn't just about gathering information, though. It also contains something called the Golden Record, a compilation of sounds and images, spoken words and music. Telling the story of our world. It's intended for the inhabitants of other space systems who might come across Voyager as its interstellar journey goes on.
The level of detail was unprecedented at the time.
The first images that Voyager sent back were shared throughout the scientific world. At the University of London, they've kept a store of the old photos, captured and transmitted by technology pioneered in the early 1970s. The computer power that we carry around in our pockets on our phones would be
Several multiples of what's on.
Thousands, perhaps even millions of times more powerful. But they're still working. You know, I guarantee your mobile phone is probably not going to be working in 40 years' time.
Voyager still sends back signals every day, but when its power systems eventually give out, it will continue to wander the universe, a quiet envoy of the human race. Geraint Vincent, News at 10.
And all to Mozart. That's it for tonight. I'll be back again tomorrow night. Till then, from all of us, good night.
A basketball legend who became the first American to meet Kim Jong-un. Tomorrow, Piers and Susanna talk to Dennis Rodman about his close friendship with one of the world's most mysterious and dangerous men, his relationship with Donald Trump, and whether the future of world peace could be in his hands. Dennis Rodman, tomorrow on Good Morning Britain.
Whatever the weather, SSE boiler cover sponsors the national weather.
Hello again, good evening. Some nice quiet weather developing over the next few hours. Much of any rain dying away, clearing skies. And across the board, tomorrow is drier and brighter. A smattering of showers here and there, but more sunshine on offer. And then from Thursday, more unsettled conditions pushing in yet again to end the week. Back to tonight though, and across the board, skies are clearing. And that's allowing temperatures to fall away a little lower than of late, down to around 9 or 10 Celsius rurally tonight. On to tomorrow under those clear skies, a beautiful start across England, Wales and much of Scotland as well. There will be a few showers in the far north and west and into Northern Ireland, but for most of us it's likely to be a dry day with some decent sunny spells, little bits of cloud bubbling up from time to time. Temperatures are fresher but still very pleasant, and down in the south, southeast it could get up to around 20, maybe 21 Celsius. I'm afraid it's all change again though from Thursday. Low pressure in charge once more, so some showery and blustery conditions to end the week. Good night.
Whatever the weather, SSE boiler cover sponsors the national weather.
Hello, good evening. A serious case review has concluded that social workers and medical professionals missed signs that could have saved the life of a murdered toddler. Aisha Smith suffered injuries consistent with a car crash victim after her mother stamped on her. Now a report has said social workers allowed the needs of Aisha's mother to overshadow those of her daughter. Rajiv Poppert reports.